It's great to be here with all of you, and had a wonderful time meeting some of your folks last night and also this morning, and so it's a privilege to be here. We are thrilled to be in Birmingham. At some point, I hope that we do say a little bit more about Auburn Seminary, because we are the Auburn without a football team. I know that's a big disappointment to you, but there are other Auburns. Auburn Seminary was founded in upstate New York in 1818. So I think we have you beat by 101 years, maybe Independent Presbyterian Church. I think that's right in terms of the founding. And then we moved to New York City in 1939. So there's a fabulous history, and we were just discovering some of the history, Bryson, Tom, and others last night, about a connection to the Reverend Dr. Henry Edmonds and the Auburn Affirmation. So I'm going to leave it there as a teaser for you, but at some point we need to tease out this deeper connection between Auburn Seminary and this very church. So, a while ago, so this is Postcards from the Future, embodying Jesus for such a time as this. A while ago, I set a vision for Auburn Seminary, which is what presidents are supposed to do, I think, in addition to all those other things like fundraising, but setting a vision that all of our work with leaders of faith and moral courage across the country, with congregations and communities, with movements for justice, was in some way telling the future story of America. And what I mean by that is every decision that we make, every step that we take, how we show up at home, at work, every word we utter from the pulpit, every vote we make here and in other places is in ways large and small shaping the future story of our country and world for good or ill. And it's not just true for Auburn, I think, but for all of us. What is the future that we want to help create for this country and for the world? At Auburn, in our work of equipping faith leaders, communities, and movements, we also study them. We have a research function. And we study communities and leaders and institutions all across the country. And one of the research methodologies that we use is called Bright Spots. It's been popularized by brothers Chip and Dan Heath, one at Stanford, one brother at Stanford, the other brother at Duke. So a very powerful pair. And they explore these ideas in their best-selling book called Switch: How to Make Change When Change is Hard. They tell us, I quote, "We need to switch from archaeological problem solving and problem focus to bright spot evangelizing." End of quote. So at Auburn, we flipped the switch in our research on theological education, leaders, and churches from a focus on problems and hand-wringing, dying churches, troubled seminaries, to instead finding and looking all across the country, scanning, and lifting up stories of innovation that show us what is working across in many different categories. What's working? Not what's wrong, but what's actually working. There's also a long story to this Bright Spots and how it came to be, but I'm not going to go there now. Maybe later we'll have that time to talk about it. Bright Spot methodology isn't just about best practices, not getting recipes for success over here that you're going to put exactly in place over there. But it's about provoking fresh consideration of one's own context by being exposed to stories of what's working somewhere else. It's about catalyzing new thinking and action, marshaling the assets and strengths in your own location that can take root and grow. So today I want to share with you some of what we've discovered, stories of churches and faith communities across the country, 5 ecclesial bright spots. This is about ecclesiology. This is about the church. Sites of theological innovation as a rich tapestry to spark our imagination. Sometimes when we are located in a particular church, we're not even aware of what's happening out there in the world. And so I wanted to share with you some of what's happening in some other places. And these leaders and churches have asked themselves the deeply theological question, how do we live inside the imagination of God? As theologian Bill Kavanaugh would put it, where is Jesus calling us today? And how do we embody Jesus for such a time as this? So these are the questions driving some of these bright spots. Now, I want to say a word about theological innovation, because theology begins with biblical text. Now, you can almost read the whole Bible through the lens of innovation. Think about it. The nature of God as creator, who separates light from darkness, who creates the world out of nothingness, before anything was made that was made. The very nature of God is held up by the prophets as having to do with newness, as Isaiah puts it. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? And historically, the very concept of a monotheistic God against the backdrop of polytheism was an innovation. Prophetic imagination is at the heart of the biblical story and faith, the ability to imagine a more just and generous world. Prophetic imagination is all about innovation that seeks to trouble the waters and heal the world, which happens to be Auburn's tagline, the Auburn without the football team. And then there's Jesus, the great disruptor of the status quo, the resistor of empire in his day, who in his very identity as God and human, as Jesus and Messiah, epitomizes innovation. By association, we become new as well. And we heard it actually this morning in the service. If anyone is in Christ, we are a new creation. The old has passed away, behold, the new has come. And as for the Holy Spirit, the third person of the Trinity, the Spirit blows where it will. You may hear the sound of it, but you don't know where it comes from, and you do not know where it's going. You can't control it. The Holy Spirit, watch out. And then wrap it up with the futuristic vision of Revelation 21. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, for the former things had passed away. So you get the picture about this innovation thing, right? We just did that fast sweep all the way through the Bible. Did you get that? Adapt, disrupt, change, flex, regroup. I only have a short amount of time. We could have done it longer, but we did it fast. In other words, innovation, taking old things and reshaping them for a new moment. It's absolutely biblical. It's positively Trinitarian. It's part of the Godhead, integral to God's life as God and God's approach to beloved creatures and creation, part and parcel of our faith. It's also true that the genius of religious traditions is their conserving function. They hold fast and lift up what is good, time-tested over millennia. But theologian Jaroslav Pelikan helps us understand this tradition thing. He says, tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living, which suggests that traditionalism, not tradition, gives faith a bad name. So how is it then, as we think about innovation, that we forget this and we allow the church and seminaries and denominations and even ourselves to become domesticated and tamed, loath to change, and sometimes stuck in place? So in the spirit of innovation, I want to lift up some bright spots of ecclesial innovation where people are living the tradition in new ways, new and exciting ways. So the first place I want us to travel this morning is Omaha, Nebraska, home of the Tri-Faith Initiative. When I go to Omaha, it's like coming to Birmingham. The people who live there love living there. So you have some fellow and sister travelers there in Omaha who love Omaha like you love Birmingham. Omaha is now home of the Tri-Faith Initiative. People in Omaha love this. Over a decade ago, a Jewish attorney named Bob Freeman had a vision about the potential of interfaith relationship, how Christians, Jews, and Muslims could relate together in Omaha. It began around 9/11, when the Muslim community in Omaha experienced a rise in Islamophobia. At one point, the rabbi at Bob Freeman's synagogue, Rabbi Azriel, took his congregation to physically encircle the mosque to create a human wall of protection and solidarity, to follow the biblical mandate as they interpreted it, to protect the most vulnerable. In that moment, it was the Muslim community. As Rabbi Azriel said, if you can't create peace in the Middle East, how about in the Midwest? So together, he has a great sense of humor. Together, Countryside Community Church, it's a United Church of Christ church, a local synagogue, and a mosque, have bought together a 40-acre plot of land that used to be the Jewish golf course and club, because Jews in Omaha were prohibited from belonging to the one that was open for Christians only. So they have turned this asset for a new purpose. So today, on the rolling fields of the former Jewish golf course, there is a brand new synagogue, a brand new mosque, and a UCC church, connected by walkways between. By following a call to partner together, they're embodying interdependence, what it means to belong to one another. Like a marriage, these three congregations have invested a lot in being together, so they're in it for the long haul. The rabbi said he feels responsible not only for his congregation, but that his circle of concern has now expanded to include all of the others, the Christians and Muslims too. The United Church of Christ Countryside, by the way, had a perfectly fine building in town, but the promptings of the Holy Spirit led them to expand their circle of belonging and to make a witness to the power of a relationship and a vision for a shared future. In Omaha, the Tri-Faith Initiative is living into the future story of an America where all belong. And I'm just bringing some pictures. They're not exciting particularly, but these are some pictures that show you how this is working there. This is the kind of walkway, that's the Countryside UCC church, the brand new church that was built. The second bright spot is Trinity Lutheran Church. I am really captivated by this bright spot, the story of Trinity Lutheran Church in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood of Minneapolis, whose immigrant founders over 100 years ago held services in Norwegian, their native tongue. So today, Trinity is the only Christian church that has stayed in a very diverse, densely populated community of Somali Muslims, which has 3 mosques. Trinity has stayed in the neighborhood and has members now from European, Ethiopian, Eritrean, and African American descent. 30% are people of color. So this Norwegian, what was a Norwegian church, has changed over time because of where they're located. It's intergenerational, and it's reached out to a lot of unchurched folks. Their calling is to practice radical hospitality, a good Christian virtue, envisioned in the book of Acts. Instead of a deficit, Trinity experiences their location as an asset. And one of their most vibrant ministries is reaching out to Muslim neighbors, not as a teacher or missionary or something else, but as learners, as guests, and sometimes hosts. And based on these new relationships with the Muslim community, Trinity has become a locus for theological education. They invite suburban Christian congregations to come in to Little Mogadishu to visit so that they can engage in the multi-faith reality that is part and parcel of their home there in Minneapolis, which is part of a new America. One of the ministries that they have engaged, that was back in Tri-Faith, okay, and here's Trinity Lutheran Church. One of the ministries that Trinity has engaged in is a very vibrant after-school program that ministers to the whole neighborhood. They have also worked a lot with women in the Somali Muslim community who are now some of the most important, vibrant business owners in Minneapolis, in this neighborhood. The next is Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. This is the third one. Perhaps you've heard of the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III and Trinity Church on the south side of Chicago. Otis is one of Auburn's senior fellows, a group that we consider some of the prophets of our time, one of the great preachers in this country. And he met an urgent need, and it prompted an innovation that has reframed the life of Trinity UCC. And here's how it went. It began with a food desert. The inability of people in the south side of Chicago to get fresh food. And the realization that school children in the church's children, were being called into principals' offices at school because the high sugar content of the food they were eating was making them restless in class and candidates for ADHD testing. In other words, the children literally couldn't sit still in class, and so they were categorized as disciplinary problems. These were problem children, right? That's what they were hearing. And so Pastor Moss and his wife Monica said, we have to do something about this. And so they began making connections, and they decided to take the church green under the rubric, love God, live green, liberate all. So here's where it began, in this food desert. Trinity started a farm market initially with produce trucked in by local farmers that eventually was insufficient, so they decided they needed to grow their own gardens right there in the community, right there by the church, which led them to making the church green through an already necessary renovation. They needed a new roof. They needed to do some renovating like you all have done here. So the chief architect chosen for the renovation project was a woman of color from the neighborhood, whose contractor and workers were formerly incarcerated folks who now had jobs and were learning new skills as returning citizens. With the energy savings from going green, the church now pays the utility bills for older senior citizen neighbors. You see how this is going? And the Muslim owners of the nearby corner stores, you know, the little neighborhood stores, have been asked and interacted with, and they now have switched some of that sugary stuff, you know, that happens right there at the cashier's counter, you know, that you want to pick up and little hands want to pick up. They have now moved some of that sugary stuff to the back of the store and moved some of the healthier things to the front. When the kids get slushies at the corner store, you know, those ice things, those terrible ice things, you know, the slushies that probably taste sugary and good. They have to ride a stationary bike to churn the ice for the slushie to get their bodies moving. Got it? So what Pastor Moss has created out of an initial challenge, a huge challenge of hungry kids with a sugar high being hauled into principals' offices, has become a kind of complete virtuous cycle, where the prophetic imagination on solving one problem, restless children, led to innovations that touched on almost all intersectional, interrelated issues: nutrition, poverty, energy and environment, gender equity, mass incarceration, and who's your neighbor. I love this. Love it. So here we go. Trinity United Church of Christ. This is Otis Moss III. This is Monica, his wife, who really, really listened with the ear of her heart to these kids who were in trouble and tried to figure out a solution. So this is part of their community garden. So more to show, but that gives you a thumbnail. The next two bright spots, and these are the last, are Christian startups. St. Lydias in Brooklyn, New York is a dinner church, an entrepreneurial venture begun about 10 years ago by the Reverend Emily Scott. St. Lydias is focused around sharing food an ancient Christian liturgy and prayer. It's wildly attractive to millennials. Everyone is put to work right away when they come in, preparing a big meal to share around a table while hearing the stories of Jesus and praying and singing together and sharing what their lives are all about, what they're experiencing. And life for millennials in New York City is tough. It's tough. It's tough anywhere. But on the website are these alluring words describing what happens there at St. Lydias, where life is lived around a table, a progressive LGBT-affirming community, dispel isolation, reconnect neighbors, and subvert the status quo. You're looking for an experience of the holy, strong enough to lean on, deep enough to question, challenging enough to change you. Those are words that appeal to millennials. They may not appeal to all of us here, but they appeal, and this has been going for about 10 years. By day, this space, St. Lydias, is a shared workspace. So in other words, it's home not only for worship and prayer and singing hymns and being together, but it's also a place during the day that people bring their computers and work, so that they're not in coffee shops, but they're there building some kind of sense of community and work together. So this is St. Lydias. A storefront in Brooklyn. And this is some of their ritual. And just like all of us, that's Emily Scott, who was the pastor. Just like all of us, they have to wash the dishes. That's part of how the spirit of community gets built, right? You cook together, you eat together, you pray together, you sing together, and then you wash the dishes together. And finally, there's Kevin Finch from Spokane, Washington, who grew up Pentecostal, but became a Presbyterian because he said Presbyterian ministers have a pension plan. He has a great sense of humor, and I'm sure there are many other reasons that he has become a Presbyterian minister, but the pension plan was also alluring to him. He pastored for 15 or so years in traditional Presbyterian churches, all the while nurturing an avocation as a restaurant critic. So on Sundays he'd preach, and then sometime during the week he'd go to the restaurants, and he was a restaurant critic. He said that it was God's little gift to him to give him a little break from the church. You know, ministers need little breaks from churches to eat good meals and to write about them. Over time, Kevin came to know that the restaurant business and the people in it. He learned that it's the largest industry in the country. It's a brutal business and attracts vulnerable people in it, at-risk teens, young people out of work, single moms, immigrants, and ex-felons. There's no safety net often, no health insurance. Few earn a living wage. Addiction is rampant. And they have to serve us with smiles on their faces. Complicated lives. And Kevin also learned that no nonprofit or church focused on this population. Isn't that amazing? Nobody focused. They were invisible. Sometimes they are invisible, right? The people who wait on us in restaurants and other places. So one night, Jesus woke up Kevin and said, see, Kevin is still a Pentecostal in some ways. Jesus woke up Kevin and said, I need a pastor for the restaurant and hospitality industry. Are you interested? And Kevin said yes, but he knew these folks don't want a minister. He had learned that once he talked about being a minister, they scattered like roaches when you turn the lights on. True. The voice said, this is how you pastor them. Feed and care for them, and then watch what I'll do. Now, a decade or more later, Kevin is executive director of Big Table, a nonprofit that creates community around food cooked by top chefs. There's a table that seats 48, a pop-up dinner community that moves around. Waiters and bus crews sit next to owners and investors. All are served a delicious, spectacular 5 to 7 course dinner, something that servers and others often never experience personally. Kevin moves in lightly so as not to scare these unchurched folks away. talking about how difficult the industry is, how community could help. He tells his story. Over time, a community of caring based on Acts 2 has been created. And as the website puts it, Big Table exists to see the lives of those working in the restaurant and hospitality industry transformed by building community around shared meals and caring for those in crisis, transition, or falling through the cracks. For both St. Lydia's and Big Table, their flat model of folks eating around a table together is a feminist retrieval of the house church. Think Acts 16 and the disciple Lydia, who hosted people in her home. So each of these church communities is a bright spot. They're places where things are working. There's no set recipe to follow. They're so different from each other, but there are some common threads and themes that we can tease out. Each is embodying Jesus. Actually, I didn't show you, did I? Sorry. Here's Big Table. There's Kevin. There's some of the people who come to dinner. There they are. Okay. Each is embodying Jesus for such a time as this, often embracing the unchurched or the stranger or the neighbor in surprising ways. They are a foretaste of the world to come. They are engaging the world that is more demographically diverse in terms of race, age, religiously, racially, all of those diversities. They are sending and responding to the deep hungers in God's people, communities, and world. Each involves leaders attuned to the needs of their context. I mean, think about these different contexts, internally and externally, to form the church for the world. After all, the church wasn't made for itself. The church, we're made for the world. We're made for the world. Thus, a mission or outward focus. Each has realized that we need a new architecture for a new world and leaned into imagination and vision of what is needed and what could be. Each involves taking risks, experimenting to follow where the Spirit is leading despite detractors and naysayers. Just because it's a bright spot doesn't mean that everything is easy. It doesn't mean that there are no naysayers. It doesn't mean that there are people, detractors, who would like to shut things down, shut it down. So, not easy. They are not focused on defending the faith or tradition for tradition's sake, but each is focused on living the faith boldly. I mean, St. Lydia's is a good example of that in Brooklyn, of really relying on ancient liturgy and prayers to build this community. Which means that they metabolize conflict. They embrace conflict. They learn how to have conflict together. In each case, leaders have used their particular strengths and the resources and assets available to them. Think Kevin Finch and his vast knowledge of this restaurant business, to read the signs of the times, to adapt, to innovate, and to stake a claim on creating and living into the future of a church and a country where all belong. So the church, our churches, this one and others, these bright spots, are a big part of making a just and generous future happen. We have an important role to play, all of us. There is a broad network of churches, congregations, religious organizations, hundreds of thousands of them across this country. And we have a powerful role that we can play in shaping our future. And we have partners out there, secular partners, civic partners, and all others. All of us need partnership. So as we expand our horizons, the possibilities for service, for reimagination, for relevance and relationship are pretty much endless. It's ours to do. So that is what I wanted to share with you today as I travel the country and as we collect these bright spots and study them. And I'm happy to, I don't know where we are with time.
You have 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes. Okay. You all run it fast around here on a Sunday morning. Let me just tell you. I also want to say that it has been, there you are, Lee. I want to say what a privilege it is to be here with the Walthall family and to have met you and your children last night and to honor Barbara's memory and to celebrate her life and commitments by being here today. So thank you so much for this privilege and opportunity. Wonderful. Okay. A few minutes, anything. Yes, this is my cousin. Her name is Nelson. That was my mother's maiden name. Point, Rocky Point, Rocky Point.
I am really, this is more a comment than a question, I guess. So good to hear somebody who goes around the country and sees so much positive stuff.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'll repeat it. So.
Just come up to the microphone, Linda. Come up to the microphone.
Yeah, come on up. Come on up.
Speak up.
Oh, and Bryson, dear Lord and Father is 169 in the hymnal. It is there. Yeah. It's so great to listen to somebody who really knows a lot of the wonderful stuff going on in this world and in this country. I know it's true, but it's been a real shot in the arm to hear it from somebody with experience. You know, we see so much ugliness these days, so much anger and awfulness, and yet you read the Christian Century, you see all the stuff that's going on. It's wonderful. The seminaries are packed with fabulous people. So anyway, thank you for this wonderful other vision of a world. I guess my question to you is, are you really optimistic?
Actually, I don't believe in optimism so much. I'm hopeful. Hopeful is much deeper, I think, than optimism, and it comes from our deep wells of faith. And so I prefer the word hope. Yes, I'm deeply hopeful. I'm hopeful by nature because that's how God made me. And I'm hopeful because of all of the living tradition that I see around the country in leaders who right now are putting their lives on the line, sometimes literally faith leaders, to follow where God is calling them, and communities that are struggling. This is a time of deep struggle for a lot of communities, and that's holding that pain, not moving so quickly to reconciliation and healing, but holding it is sometimes a very important part of ministry. So I see people doing that. That gives me hope, even when it's hard. And I have hope in the America that we could be. I think with all of us working together, with great imagination, and with God, all things are possible. So yes, I have hope. So be not dismayed. Yeah, okay. See you soon.
Yeah, thank you again, Katharine. And I want to mention we are going, after the beautiful service that will be at 4 o'clock in the sanctuary, it's going to be lovely music. You'll hear a little bit of it in the service. And it'll be children. I mean, it's going to be really fascinating at 4 o'clock. Then a 5 o'clock service here with David Seaman preaching. After that, at 6:15, those who would like to come, we usually take reservations, but we probably got room for a couple more if you want to come. In the clubhouse across, Bob and Kenneth's place, we will have libation that we can't have at the church, and some heavy hors d'oeuvres, and an opportunity to have more conversation. She's not going to give a lecture. It's just get together and have more conversation this evening. So if you would like to get to know Katharine a little better, learn a little more, ask her your questions, this is the time to come at 6:15 to the clubhouse tonight. Thank you again for coming. We'll see you all in church.